everybody. Welcome to Cigars and Syndication. I'm Robbie Rogers. I'm here with my co-host Jay. We're passionate about cigars. We're passionate about real estate, and we're still talking about potential impacts of the government shutdown. We talked about the direct effects, and today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the indirect effects.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Junaid Noor, and yes, we are continuing our conversation as we continue smoking this Oliva Series V 135. And we're going to continue talking about what will happen if the government shuts down yet again. So over the weekend, the government basically decided to pass a continuing resolution, and we explained in the first part of this podcast what a continuing resolution is. But the continuing resolution is good only for about 30 days or so until the middle of November, I believe. And by that time, they still have to pass a budget. So what happens if they don't pass a budget?
Well, I believe, this government would completely shut down, and they would definitely impact the GDP. And then you've got to decide, politically, why is this happening? Why are they disagreeing on certain points? Why can't they get this done? And it's totally political, and I think it's an attempt for, the parties to gain an advantage and how they want this economy to work itself out. And I think Biden and his economic plan and the Republicans and what their economic plan are vastly different at this point. And right now they're just trying to flex their muscles and get their way.
Yeah, so, what it comes down to is the politics of it, where, the Democrats are trying to appease their base by passing certain plans that they feel that their base will like in order to reelect them. And the Republicans are doing the same thing. They're trying to pass or not pass certain plans which would appease their base so they get reelected. But here's a question for you. What percentage of the GDP do you think is government spending?
Well, I already know the answer to that in our conversation earlier, and it blew my mind when you told me it was 25%.
25%. So if the government shuts down, 25% of GDP stops. It stops. We decrease the GDP by 25%.
And when that happens, how long does the government have to be shut down to get their goal to shrink the GDP to kick inflation?
So in a previous episode, podcast, we had did some math. We had done some math, and we figured that the increasing of the interest rates will shrink the economy by a certain percentage. We were at about 8% inflation. We said the increasing of interest rates will decrease inflation by about 4%, or 4 to 6%, and the Fed wants a 2% target. And the only way that they can do that is by reducing the GDP. So that means from the private sector, sales would have to reduce, people would have to get laid off, and corporations would have to shrink their earnings and their revenues and their earnings by shrinking their expenses because sales have gone down, and therefore the GDP goes down, the gross domestic product goes down, and the Fed hits their 2% inflation target.
And the Fed thought that they were going to achieve this through a series of increases in interest rates, and so far the economy has remained fairly strong.
Pretty robust, that's correct. Right now inflation is still at about 4%. Which a lot of economists are saying that it's really difficult to attain 2% inflation, especially because earnings are still doing pretty well. People are still gainfully employed. The unemployment rate hasn't really gone up that much. And, people are still spending money, even though we're starting to see a little bit of a slowdown. But you know what? When the government shuts down, guess how long it takes? And because they're responsible for 25% of GDP, guess how long it'll take for us to reduce the GDP by the 2 or 4% that we need?
How long is that going to take, Jay?
So it's 25% If it's shut down for the entire year, that'll reduce by 25%. If you divide that by 12 months, that's about roughly 2% per month. So if they're shut down for 1 month, GDP goes down by 2%. If they're shut down by 2 months, the GDP goes down another 2%. So maybe, maybe inadvertently the Fed will hit their target, although there will be a lot of carnage in the wake.
Yeah, and you've just got to, we're just guessing at what the motivation is for the shutdown, and we know it's political, but we don't know what's all behind all the political attacks that are going on, I guess, for each side and their positioning for the new budget, but clearly clearly there's a lot of big issues that are going to impact economy, which will have indirect effects on the real estate. And
Absolutely. And so, indirectly, so again, indirectly, the GDP will start going down, inflation will start going down. But also, you have 19% of the federal budget flows down to the states. So the states also get affected by it. And so individuals will get affected by it. Anybody who is, Medicaid is a state sponsored program. Medicaid will have to either really reduce itself or, they won't be able to make payments. Social Security, we don't have a Social Security fund. Ronald Reagan robbed Social Security and from an accounting perspective moved all the money out of Social Security into other areas of the U.S. government. So we don't have a Social Security fund anymore. Social Security fund is based on the younger population paying in to pay the older population. And, it's kind of like a Ponzi scheme, basically, right? You got to get new and younger people at the bottom working to start paying the people at the top who are already retired.
so clearly, any government employee, they're going to get furloughed. They're going to have direct implications from the shutdown. But what are maybe some of the indirect effects that are going to hurt, everyday people or maybe private contractors that have government contracts?
So a lot of the government contractors it depends on the agency, right? Certain agencies have contingency plans for government contractors. So for example, we have a lot of government security contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those people will probably still, depending on what agency they're working with, they'll still have to be there. They might be considered essential employees, and they'll still have to serve, but they get paid later. But in real estate terms, a lot of the younger population goes with FHA loans because of the 5% down payment. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens, because if you are under contract for an FHA loan and, the housing market is very tight as it is, and there's a huge demand for housing and a very limited supply. If a couple finds a home that they want to purchase and they want to go the FHA route, and the government shuts down, what happens to that loan? They only have a contract for maybe 30 days, and the seller will only extend for so long. I mean, there's a lot of buyers out on the market. So if you can't close your loan, you're going to lose your house.
Yeah, for sure. The housing market is it's kind of in a bizarre place. I mean, for the most part, usually, the interest rates and the home values or home prices are inversely related. And right now, that's just not the case. The home prices are remaining high. The demand is still there. So the interest rate has certainly had an impact, but the demand is still so high. There's people waiting to buy homes. I mean, there's people have multiple offers on their homes, and if you had a HUD loan that got frozen, you would lose the house.
And then if you go to the commercial sector, for a company like Albany Park Capital, where we and lots of other people like us are looking at HUD loans because of the lower interest rates and better terms than the market in order to be able to finance projects. Well, if HUD is not operational, all those projects go on hold.
So what if you're in a landlord situation and you have Section 8 housing or some housing supplements from the housing authority? I mean, those are all going to stop as well.
Yes, yes. And, if the landlords are smart enough where they have capital reserves, they'll be able to make their payments to the banks. Interestingly enough, your interest is not going to stop running. Even if it's a HUD loan, if there's nobody available to accept your payments, they're usually done electronically anyway. But just because if you have a Section 8 housing development where you're dependent primarily on HUD to pay your Section 8 rent, and you have a Section 8, and you have a HUD loan, well, the HUD loan still has to be paid regardless, even though you're not receiving your rent checks. Because eventually the idea is that you will receive your rent checks when the government gets back into working again, or when the budget is passed. But people have to have reserves available for that.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully they've got a good plan and have reserves and can kind of weather the storm. But I mean, it has some serious implications for everybody in real estate.
And think of it from our perspective. If we stop a construction project because HUD is not available to provide us draws for our HUD loan, then the contractors who are working on our project will have to start laying off people because they're not getting paid from us. The material suppliers will have to hold on to their materials because we're not paying them to release that. And you're going to have inventory piling up. And that's one of the reasons that you can just kind of visualize how the economy starts going into a downward spiral. And 25% is a big hit to take onto GDP, even 2% a month. And it's not unheard of, because back in 2019, they were closed for over a month.
Yeah, I mean, a long shutdown would have considerable impact. I mean, on one of our projects, if we had a HUD loan that we couldn't or weren't able to access the draws for the loan, our contractor's not going to be on site. It's going to slow down and delay the project, which makes us incur more carry cost. Ultimately, it'd be great if we can get the GDP to shrink a little bit and kick inflation and get these interest rates down. But man, it just doesn't seem healthy to kick the economy. But that's unfortunately seems like that has to happen.
Yeah, and a lot of it also has to do with the Fed wanting to have the interest rate or the inflation rate down to 2%, which it might not be tenable anymore. But it's been a long, long time. I think it was um, back in the 90s where my parents bought their first home in 91, and they were paying a 9.5% mortgage, and this is the first time mortgages are over 7% in 25 years.
Well, one of the things for me is that the economy is still going strong. People are still spending, but I think a greater percentage of that spending is credit card debt. And, I hope they factor that in, moving forward, and understanding that people are accumulating this debt at 24% interest on their credit cards. What's the long-term impact of that? And eventually I think that's going to also impact the GDP.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The credit card debt keeps going up, and at some point, right, credit card companies will, people will reach their credit card limits, and now you have Christmas coming up, and so we really hope that, the government passes a long-term budget so people are not affected during the Christmas time, when most of not just people spending, but remember, retailers depend on fourth quarter sales to boost their earnings and their profit margins.
Yeah, I think some of the retailers, they actually recognize 30% of their revenue for the entire year during the holiday season.
Right. And, if there is a government shutdown that goes past Christmas, a lot of federal employees would not have the money. They may not even have the credit cards available because, if you're not getting a check, and if you're living paycheck to paycheck, then, they may already be charging their essentials on their credit cards, like groceries and medication and things like that. And they would not be in a position to be able to spend for the Christmas holidays, which that they may have planned to spend.
Well, Jay, I've really been enjoying this Oliva. This V Series 135 has been a really good smoke, pretty consistent, good draw, great burn. That Perfecto shape has got me sold. I like it. I'll probably go buy another one.
Yeah, no, I'm really enjoying this, and we hope that we were able to teach something to our audience. We hope that we were able to kind of help you understand how a government shutdown affects you directly, affects you indirectly. And, we'd be happy to, hear some comments, hear some feedback from our audience. And we hope that we're able to help you and, look us up on social media.
Yeah, jump on our website, read our articles, leave comments, and hopefully, we helped you understand, some of the effects of this government shutdown.
Yeah, and if you can pick up this All of Us Series V, absolutely recommended.
We'll see you next time.
Bye bye.